For our preliminary task, we were asked to create a short film while experimenting with new camera techniques and shots.
In this, we incorporated a variety of different shots that we had considered prior to filming. Some of these include panning shots, medium close-ups and handycam.
Our main challenge for this project was how we were going to present the juxtaposition of the antagonist and protagonist. In this, we experimented with lighting to consider how this would change the representation of the characters. As we didn't have the available resources to develop lighting, we used the torch function on a mobile phone. This helped to create the low-key lighting shown here.
Low-key lighting is a typical convention of protagonists, as can be seen from film Dark Knight. This was extremely useful in our film opening, as lighting played an important role in presenting our characters. After we had considered the effect of lighting on a film, we thought about how different camera movements would work.
The next way we represented the protagonist and antagonist was through the use of costume. At first, this task appeared to be rather challenging because we realised that we would both be wearing school uniform.
Our possible solutions to this problem came to us rather quickly. We decided that we could adapt the characters through the use of props, therefore making them unique and different to each other. This was a good idea, however we didn't carry it through because we couldn't decide on what props would help distinguish the characters.
In the end, we decided to have both characters in our school uniform. We would adapt the way they would wear the uniform in order to distinguish the difference between them. For example, the antagonist wore a suit in order to be portrayed as a sinister character, whereas the protagonist wore a shirt in order to come across as a generic protagonist, i.e. looking like a student. One of our most prominent techniques that we used on our preliminary task was a panning shot. These shots helped in creating a continuity-based shot sequence. The panning shot, however, was used too much. It became repetitive and boring. We made sure that in our film opening, we would use a larger variety of camera movements.
When considering how to diversify our camera techniques, we thought about how locations would change the plot. The preliminary task limited our locations to within the school, so in order to create an interesting plotline, we filmed both inside and outside the buildings. We realised soon, however, that the majority of this final clip was a transition of the protagonist walking about. We applied this knowledge into our final production in order to create the most interesting shot sequence possible.
Our final film opening would not have been possible without the experiences of our Wilderness Woods shoot and our preliminary task. We especially learned about how important planning was prior to the shoot. In our Wilderness Woods task, it was apparent that our planning was not satisfactory when it came to filming. This meant that we didn't have a completely clear picture of what we would be doing on that day.
We made huge improvements on this when creating our film opening. In the early design phases, we created multiple storyboards featuring drafts of what each individual shot would look like in their chronological order. This helped us to create a clear image of what needed to be done.
Creating these storyboards was very useful in helping us to create a clear and coherent plan. The outcome of this, when applied to our final film opening, was a plot that was both effective in supporting the general horror conventions, but also well for continuity edit.
Mise en scène was a very important part of planning this preliminary task due to the fact that we had very limited resources available when completing this task. As previously explained, we needed to find a way to distinguish the difference between these two characters, and we decided that mise en scène was the way forward.
We used clothing and lighting aspects of mise en scene in order to determine the differences between the protagonist and antagonist. However, one other important aspect of this issue was to not show the face of the antagonist.
We showed the face of the protagonist in most shots in order to construct a sense of familiarity between the character and the audience. However, we did not show the face of the antagonist in order to construct enigma codes. This kept the audience interested in the plotline and connotes the antagonist as mysterious and sinister.
Another important element of this film came in post-production, as we included a soundtrack in order to anchor the action, making this film more intriguing for the viewers.
We used a free sound which we found online and was perfect for our preliminary task. This was because the soundtrack contained multiple crescendos and decrescendos in order to raise and lower the level of music dramatically.
We also increased the dynamics at the end of the film to construct a dramatic ending, with a lot of build-up to it. This allowed the audience to stay interested in the film as the soundtrack and sound effects add a sense of verisimilitude to the final production.
We liked the effect this had on our preliminary task, therefore we carried it forward and used sound in our final production.
In the final production, we used both a soundtrack and sound effects. The reason we used both of these different types of sounds were to anchor the footage and to make the film more entertaining for the viewers.
We were inspired by the film Saw, as a low-key tense soundtrack with a gradual build was used in order to anchor the footage. As viewers, we felt very tense at this moment and were focused entirely on the action, anticipating what was to come.
A huge feature of both our preliminary task and Wilderness Woods task that was missing was the addition of colour grading. This technique is used across a huge variety of films, especially in the horror genre. In our final production, we considered different ways that DaVinci Resolve, the editing software, could be used to alter the colour, brightness and contrast.
We sought inspiration from colour grading from the film Sinister. As can be seen, the shots are shown with a darker bluish hue. We found this to be extremely effective in the genre.